My name is Vanessa Cole. I'm 34 years old, and the day my mother-in-law called me a gold digger, she said it loud enough for all 140 wedding guests to hear. She didn't whisper it. She didn't pull me aside beforehand. She didn't write me a letter, or leave a voicemail, or find any of the 100 quieter ways a person can communicate their disapproval. She stood up at my wedding reception, mid-toast, wine glass still in her hand, and announced to every single person in that room that she wasn't going to pretend she was happy about her son marrying someone who was, in her words, after his money. The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet right before something breaks. That specific kind of silence where everyone is holding very still and deciding what they are about to do next. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't stand up and correct her in front of those 140 people, the way every instinct in my body wanted to. I picked up my own glass, looked directly at her across that room, and said, "Thank you for your honesty." Then I sat back down and finished my dinner. What she didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, including most of my own family, was that I made significantly more money than her son did. Had been making it for years, entirely on my own, long before Daniel and I ever met. The suggestion that I was marrying him for financial security was so far from the truth that correcting it almost felt beside the point. Almost. Because 2 years later, Patricia Cole would be the one calling me. And what she needed from me, only I could give her. Before I tell you what she asked for and what I decided, tell me where you're watching from tonight. Tell me what time it is where you are. I read every comment, and I want to know how far this one travels. I grew up in the kind of household where money was present but never comfortable. My father was a civil engineer who worked long hours and came home tired. My mother managed the household with the precision of someone who understood that the difference between fine and not fine was usually about 30 days and one unexpected expense. We weren't struggling. We just never had room for the kind of carelessness that wealth allows. That upbringing gave me something I didn't fully understand the value of until much later. It gave me a very clear picture of the difference between what things cost and what they're worth, and a complete absence of sentimentality about either one. I graduated near the top of my class, got into a graduate program in financial economics that I paid for through a combination of scholarships and work, and started my career at a consulting firm at 24 with the specific intention of building something that was entirely mine. No inheritance, no help, no fallback position. By 30, I was running my own boutique financial advisory practice. Not large, but profitable, and built on a client roster that had taken me 6 years to develop through referrals and results. I was earning well above what most people my age earned, and I had structured my finances carefully enough that the number in my accounts bore very little resemblance to what my lifestyle suggested. I drove a modest car. I lived in a clean but unremarkable apartment. I wore good clothes, but not obviously expensive ones. I didn't do this to hide anything. I did it because I had watched too many people spend what they earned on looking like they earned it, and I had decided early on that I was more interested in the actual thing than the appearance of it. This, I would later understand, was partly why Patricia never saw me coming. I met Daniel at a conference in Charlotte when I was 28. He was presenting a panel on operational strategy, and I was in the audience thinking about 3 other things until he said something that made me actually put my phone down. He was funny in the specific way that people who are genuinely smart sometimes are not performing intelligence, just thinking out loud and letting you keep up. We talked for 2 hours afterward over coffee that turned into dinner, that turned into a 3-hour conversation that I didn't want to end. He asked about my work without condescension and without competition. He didn't ask what my firm's revenue was or how many clients I had. He asked what problem I found most interesting to solve. That question told me everything I needed to know about him. His mother was a different education entirely. Patricia Cole was not a cruel woman. I want to be precise about that because the story is more interesting if I'm honest. She was a woman who loved her son with the specific intensity of someone who had sacrificed a great deal for him and had very fixed ideas about what that sacrifice deserved in return. She had worked hard, raised Daniel largely on her own after his father left when Daniel was 12. And she had decided somewhere along the way that the woman who ended up with her son needed to meet a set of criteria that she had developed privately and never quite articulated, but enforced constantly. I didn't meet those criteria. I could tell from the first dinner. She asked me in front of Daniel what it was I did exactly. When I told her, she nodded with the specific nod of someone who has heard an answer they find insufficient. When I mentioned the practice I'd built, she said that's lovely in a tone that made clear she thought it was not particularly lovely. For 2 years of dating, Patricia found small ways to communicate the same message. Comments about how Daniel worked so hard and deserved to come home to someone who prioritized him. Observations about mutual friends who had married women who had made the family the center of everything. A habit of asking Daniel questions about his finances in front of me, as if checking to make sure nothing had gone missing. Daniel saw it. He apologized for it regularly. I told him every time not to bother. I was not marrying his mother. I was marrying him. Those were separate decisions, and I had made both of them with full information. What I hadn't fully anticipated was the wedding toast. We had planned a beautiful wedding. Not extravagant, but considered, the kind of event that reflects genuine taste rather than just budget. Daniel and I had split the costs deliberately and carefully, because we were building a life together, and we both believed the wedding should reflect that. What neither Daniel nor most of our guests knew was that I had quietly covered approximately 40% of the total costs myself, including the venue that Patricia had mentioned to her sister as something the kids had managed to afford. I had asked Daniel not to correct that impression. There was no point. Patricia stood up during the toasts, after Daniel's best man and before my sister, and delivered the most honest version of herself that I had ever seen. She said she loved her son. She said she wanted him to be happy. And then she said she wasn't going to stand there and pretend she didn't have concerns about a woman who had appeared from nowhere and moved quickly, and that she thought the family deserved honesty even when it was uncomfortable. The phrase, after his money, landed in that room like something dropped from a height. I said thank you for her honesty. I sat down. Daniel was on his feet before I could reach for his arm, but I caught him and shook my head, and he sat back down because he trusted me and because he understood that whatever was about to happen next was not going to happen here. We finished the wedding. We took our photographs. We danced our first dance to a song we had chosen together 6 months earlier. Patricia sat at her table with her arms crossed through most of the reception, speaking to Daniel when he came to her and ignoring me with the focused energy of someone doing it on purpose. I never said another word to her about the toast that night. For the next 2 years, Patricia and I existed in the same family with the specific politeness of two people who have agreed, without ever discussing it, to maintain a surface that neither of them fully believes in. She was present at holidays. She was cordial when we spoke. She never apologized, and I never asked her to. I had decided, sometime around the second hour of my own wedding reception, that I was done needing anything from Patricia Cole that she hadn't already demonstrated she was capable of giving. Then, 18 months into our marriage, Daniel got a call from his sister. Patricia's house, the same house she had lived in for 23 years, the house Daniel had grown up in, was in foreclosure. Daniel's father had quietly taken out a second mortgage on the property years before the divorce, without Patricia's full understanding of the terms. After the divorce, the payments had fallen to Patricia, and they had been manageable until they weren't. And by the time anyone in the family understood the full picture, there was a letter with a 30-day window and a number that needed to be met to stop the process. The number was not small. It was also not something Daniel and his sister could cover between them, not without time they didn't have. Daniel didn't ask me. I want to say that clearly because it matters. He didn't bring it to me directly, didn't frame it as a request, didn't imply anything. I heard him on the phone with his sister late on a Tuesday night, voice low, going through the numbers in a way that made clear he had already done the math and knew how it came out. I sat in the kitchen doorway for a few minutes. Then I went to bed. And I lay there for a long time thinking about what I was going to do, because I already knew what I was going to do, and I was just working out exactly how. The next morning, I told Daniel I wanted to cover the arrears. All of it. And I wanted to be the one to tell Patricia myself, in person, and I wanted to go alone. He asked if I was certain. I told him I had never been more certain of anything. I drove to Patricia's house on a Thursday afternoon. She opened the door, already looking different than I'd ever seen her. Smaller, somehow, in the way that people look when the thing they've been managing privately finally comes out into the open. She had known someone was coming, that much was clear, but I don't think she had known it would be me. I did not bring up the wedding toast. I did not bring up the 2 years of small cuts, the directed questions, after his money, that had sat in the middle of my own reception like something nobody knew what to do with. I did not produce a list of what I'd put up with or a record of what I'd never been given credit for. I told her the arrears had been cleared. The foreclosure process had been stopped. The house was hers. No conditions. No speech. No moment designed to make her feel the weight of who was standing in her doorway. She stood there for what felt like a long time. And for the first time in 3 years, Patricia Cole had absolutely nothing to say. She called me 4 days later. Not to apologize, exactly. People like Patricia rarely apologize in a form you could replay for someone else. But she asked questions. Real ones for the first time. About my work, about how I'd built the practice, about what the early years had actually looked like. She listened in a way she hadn't before. She asked a follow-up question, and then another one. I answered all of them. I didn't do it because she'd earned it. I didn't do it to be gracious, or to prove a point, or to demonstrate anything about my character. I did it because the version of me that had been waiting 3 years for some form of acknowledgement from Patricia Cole had finally, somewhere between that Tuesday phone call and that Thursday afternoon, let go of the waiting entirely. And the version of me that sat on the phone with her that Friday morning had nowhere to be except in the conversation she'd finally decided to have. She isn't warm with me, even now. We are not the family that hugs at every holiday or calls just to catch up. But she looks at me differently. She answers when I call. She asks before she assumes. And every time I sit across from her at a family dinner, some small part of me remembers standing in her doorway on a Thursday afternoon, watching the woman who had told 140 people I was after her son's money, finding out, finally, who had actually shown up when it mattered. She knows now what I do, what I've built, what the numbers actually look like. I didn't tell her. She found out the way people find out things they should have asked about years earlier. I don't think she expected it. Most people don't, when they've already decided who you are. If someone has ever decided who you were before they bothered to ask, tell me about it below. I want to hear it. I read every single comment.